Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Father Tim actually just told me I was coming to this, so anyway, but I appreciate you. Anyway, I'm wearing this ridiculous coat. I just came from a tropical island in the South Pacific, i.e. Okinawa, Japan, and I'm just freezing. I'm freezing to death, so I'm wearing this ridiculous quilted jacket in Georgia. But here we are. Okay, everybody, thank you for having me. Father Jack Fitzpatrick, Diocese of Colorado Springs. And I probably met you all last year. Anyway, I'm a priest in the Navy, and so I'm serving the Marine Corps currently. I've just finished 2 years in Japan with your United States Marine Corps, and then I'm heading to Camp Pendleton to 11th Marines. That's Marine Artillery. So it should be very ooh and very raw. Looking forward to it. Okay, looking forward to it. St. Barbara, pray for us. So tonight. What I thought we would talk about for maybe a half hour-ish or so, as long as you can stand me, is this, and that is the centrality, the primacy of the altar in the Christian understanding of the world. Okay, I think this is a very important thing because a lot of the time, at least I've experienced this when you walk into churches in America. There's a huge difference between a Catholic church, at least the way that they're supposed to be. Sometimes they're goofy. Sometimes, it's kind of the blight of the 1980s that both Father Tim and I came from. But anyway, when a Catholic church is built the way it's supposed to be, or at least adorned the way it's supposed to be, like yours here is, it is entirely different from any other kind of Christian church, entirely different. And you can see it just when you walk through the door, okay? And the reason is because everything about a Catholic church is meant to focus our eyes and our attention on what's most important. And what is most important in a Catholic church is the church's altar. That's what it is, okay? Because on the church's altar is where all the blood and guts, literally in this case, of Christian worship, where it all happens. Protestant churches are different, okay? Because a lot of the time, what's most important? What's most important is, the congregation singing. Congregation participating in worship. Maybe it's a sermon, and so the place where the pastor is going to preach might be kind of like more elaborately placed, or it's whatever it is. But for us, for Catholics anyway, for ancient apostolic Christianity, the most important thing and the only important thing is the altar. Okay, because as we know, what happens in a Catholic church on the altar is that we relive the whole drama of Jesus, the eternal Son of the Father, incarnate, God and man at the same time, offering his life to the Father for our own salvation. That's what happens on the altar. The priest, when he's who has been sealed by the Spirit of God to do this work, when he says the words in the 2,000-year-old red book that we've got on the altar, when he does these things, the reality of Jesus saving us happens, as if for the only time it's ever happened. It's an amazing thing, and that's our focus in the Catholic world. Okay, that's our focus in the Catholic Church. But altars themselves are kind of interesting things, because in the ancient church, the early church, we didn't really have altars, so to speak. When the church was brand new, and I mean in its infancy, when the Mass was celebrated, it was celebrated in people's homes, that kind of thing. And actually, it took the church a little bit of time to figure out actually how to do it, because Jesus, at the Last Supper, he was celebrating a Jewish ritual, and he gave to us this general form, the bread and the wine, and there's prayers, and then the early church, had to figure out, okay, how do we take this Jewish ritual and make it our own? What is it that Jesus actually wanted us to do with this that's distinctive about our own religion that we're sort of developing into at this time? And so the Christians were surrounded by pagan religions, and pagan religions, what were they all about? Sacrifices of animals that happened on altars. Because the thing about an altar is it's different from any other kind of table. Okay, an altar is a table on which something is going to be killed. Okay, a sacrifice is going to be made. Something's going to die on an altar. An altar is not the kind of place where you make a lovely fall display for your church. An altar is not a place where you have, like pumpkin spice whatever. Even in Japan, we have pumpkin spice latte, believe it or not. But it's not the place where you make lovely seasonal decor, okay? But we had the military version, which was terrible. The actual version is not good, I don't think. It's one of the man things. But the military version at the PX was particularly bad. But the point is, any port in a storm, right? But anyway, an altar is a place where a man who has been consecrated by God for a specific purpose is going to kill something for your benefit. Okay, that's what an altar is. And just like, for example, just like in Narnia, the stone table with Aslan. I don't want to spoiler alert, whatever. Aslan dies on a stone table because it's kind of an altar, in its own way. Anyway, the point is, an altar is a serious bit of furniture. Okay, it's a serious thing. And altars in the ancient church were made, in the ancient world rather, were made out of immovable materials, made out of stone. Actually, and in the Jewish sense, an altar was kind of more of like a big platform, because it would have to be something that you could bring an animal, like a large animal, like a cow, onto, and the priest. Anyway, big, important bits of real estate, altars, where something is going to be offered to God by its life being taken in a ritualistic way. And I know that sounds creepy and weird or whatever, Temple of Doomish or whatever it is, but that's altars, and all the way, as long as human beings have been doing religion, of any different kind, as long as we have been doing it, we have been killing things on altars for God or gods or the divine or whatever it is. And Jesus is no different. That Jesus tells us that he's going to give himself up as the sacrifice, propitiation, that's a technical term we use, for our own sins. He tells us that his death is going to pay back the debt to the Father that we owe from Adam and Eve messing everything up in the garden. The Jewish people thought that Jesus perhaps was going to, raise an army and just hoorah the Romans out of the promised land, or maybe they thought he was going to be a political leader. But Jesus knew none of those things were true. He was going to be a sacrifice for us. He was going to be a sacrifice, and that his own blood now would replace the blood of all the animals that were ever offered to God in the past. From now on, in the Christian world, there is one sacrifice, and that's Jesus and his blood. And the altar, the original altar, is the cross. On that hill of Calvary where he died for us. The sacrifice is made for us there. But because Jesus knew that his death for us on the cross, it would not be enough for us to bookmark that in your browsing history. It would not be enough to just sort of hey, let's remember 2,000 years ago. We would need to live that sacrifice. We would need to experience it more than just having a memory of it, that kind of a thing. He knew that we needed to ritualize that, that there needed to be a way for us, Christians, to be brought into the actual presence of that sacrifice, and that would require altars, and it would require priests, and it would require vestments. It would require all different kinds of things. And, for 2,000 years, we have built altars. In every corner of the earth, we have built altars on which we would celebrate the sacrifice of Jesus saving us from our sins. Totally different thing from building churches in which we can sing and praise together. Totally different thing from building the kind of church in which we can listen to a very inspiring and good sermon and be inspired to live better lives. We build churches to house altars on which the sacrifice of Jesus becomes real for you, as if it's happening for the first and only time. See, that's what our churches are about. You can have the worst preaching in the world. You can have no commentary on current circumstances. You can have the worst preaching in the world. You can have the most horrible leadership. You can even have an ugly building, but you have an altar in there. Okay, I've for 2 years I've been in these government chapels that are just horrific. Terrible. And ever since 1945, it's been the same thing over there in Okinawa. There's an altar in there, and that altar marks that building in the sight of God as a place where His presence comes to live and to dwell and to change the whole land just by it being there. Okay, that's what the Christian altar is all about. The very first altars that we had were tombs. I'm sure you're probably aware of that. Maybe you're not. I'm going to tell you anyway that in the ancient days, when Christians first started giving their lives for Jesus, when they first started getting martyred, the Roman officials wanted to, I don't know, just keep the bodies away so that we could not venerate them. That was the idea. Just kind of like we did with Osama bin Laden. If you're aware of that, when he was finally killed, they took him to an aircraft carrier, USS Carl Vinson, and he was buried at sea, in accord with Muslim law, but so that there could not be a pilgrimage place for him, after he had died. It was very careful. A Navy chaplain did that. But regardless, train of thought is derailed on Osama bin Laden. Who'd have thought I was going to talk about Osama bin Laden? I had no idea. The Romans thought they were going to do the same thing with Christians. That's what it was. Right. They thought they were going to do the same thing with Christians. But Christians, what they said was, no, you're not going to take the bodies of our dead away from us. That's important. We're going to venerate our dead, which we still do today. Freaks Protestants out. We're still going to do that today. And so what they would do is they would take the bodies of the dead, or their remains, whatever they could find, and take them down underneath the city of Rome into the catacombs, which are sewers. Some of you have probably been there, and they would bury them just kind of Indiana Jones style, off into the corners or whatever, like the tomb of Sir Richard in Last Crusade. Anyway, they would do that. And it was on those tombs, the Christians, when the church was being persecuted, they would go on those tombs is where the priests would offer the Mass. So when the church had moved from having Mass in people's homes and then had to go underground because of persecution, the first altars we had were the tombs of the martyrs. Because the ancient Christians thought, as we still do today, that this is, what better place could we have to celebrate the sacrifice of Jesus than on the tombs of those who have sacrificed for him. Isn't that amazing? So they did. This is why, by the way, the priest kisses the altar in the beginning of Mass and at the end. Because, now, according to church law, at least before 1968, probably, every altar solemnly consecrated had to have the relic of a saint in it. And those rules don't exactly apply today. We still try to do it regardless. And a lot of time you don't know what relic is in an altar, but the idea is that traditionally speaking, relics of the saints are put into our altars. They're kind of masoned down in there in sort of commemoration of what we used to do. That we used to celebrate the Mass on the tombs of the martyrs in the ancient days. So when you see the priest coming into Mass and bending low over the altar and kissing it, that's why. It's to venerate the relic that's inside of there. Also, altars are consecrated with the sacred chrism, the oil that consecrates us at our baptism and our confirmation at holy orders for the priesthood. The altar is consecrated. It's not just blessed, it's consecrated with that oil because of how important and special it is. It's kind of a neat thing. Every important aspect of your life happens in front of an altar. Every important thing does. Your baptism, it happens in a Catholic church. That's where it happens, and it happens in the eyesight, in the earshot of that sacred place where Jesus offers himself for you. Because it's that sacrifice that powers the sacrament of baptism. That's what does it. We don't baptize people in the woods. We don't baptize. Anything at a pinch, but we don't baptize people in like venue locations. We don't do that. And it's not just because we got these rules that say you got to get baptized in the physical church, but because it does not make any sense to not have a seminal event in your life happening away from the altar of God where the sacrifice is offered. It's why we do it. We do that for that reason. When you make your first communion, obviously, it's before the altar where the sacrifice becomes food for you that you receive for the first time. When you receive the sacrament of confirmation before the altar, the same sacrifice of the same God powers that sacrament. When you make your wedding vows, it's before the altar of God. At least in theory, it's supposed to be. It's before the altar of God. See, every now and then, this happens that couples come into the office. Oh, Padre, we want to get married. and we're going to get married at some, I don't know, dumb location, whatever. That's internal priest monologue, but whatever. I'm leaving, so I would say whatever. You can hate it or not, but some dumb location. We're going to get married on the beach. And we say, well, sorry to be stuck in the mud here, but Catholic rule is it's got to be in a church. Why does it have to be in the church? We could have a much more beautiful location elsewhere. And, that's when you kind of try to bring people along. Of course, there's no bringing brides along. Forget it. You think you're going to do that? Just stop. Do something else. Think something else, But I've learned that. You see, that's the thing. There's no reasoning. There's no reasoning with the bride. There just isn't. But the point here is the sacrifice, the sacrament of marriage, of all things, happens before the altar of God, Because the God that gave his life for the flourishing of the human race blesses this union that causes the human race to flourish. That's what it's all about. And let me tell you, if a married couple thinks that they're going to, get through this life they have, without sacrifice or without total dependency on the God that has called them to this sacrament, well, then they're just crazy and absurd. And you know what? Sometimes, young people just have to be forced to do what's right. It's fine. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But marriages of all sacraments happen before the altar of God, And it's an amazing thing. The ordination of the priesthood, obviously, before the altar of God. The priest who's going to be kind of forever joined to the altar. Priests do all kinds of different things. We've got different roles in the church, but what is most important that we do is we offer the sacrifice of Jesus on that altar. Without priests, the altar doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And without the altar, there'd be nothing for priests to do. Interestingly enough, in the Jewish world, today, when we think about religious leaders in the Jewish religion, we think about rabbis. Rabbis are the leaders of the Jewish world. But Jews have priests. Interestingly enough, they have a priesthood. The thing is, Jews no longer have an altar, because where's the altar of the Jewish people? The temple in Jerusalem. The Jews are interesting insofar as there's only one place where they can offer sacrifice. They can't do it anywhere. It has to be on the Temple Mount, in the place where the Temple of Solomon had been built. That's the only place where sacrifice can be offered. So in the Jewish understanding, there has been no sacrifice at all offered for how many years? 2,000? Or a little less than that, I guess. 2,000, probably right about 2,000 years. Whatever. The point is, but the Jews still have priests. And actually, an interesting thing is, the Jewish priesthood is conferred just by being in a priestly family. So it's not like there's a separate ordination or anything kind of ritual for it. You're born a priest into a priestly line. And actually, the Jewish word for priest is Kohen. Kohen. So if you ever meet people named Cohen, if they're not Jewish, something went wrong. They're probably. I like to say that to people that have Irish last names. They're not Catholic. I'm like, what happened here? But either way. There's two chaplains I know, and one of them's a Seventh-day Adventist named O'Reilly. I'm like, man, somebody got this wrong in your family, bud. I don't know how, whatever. But I don't think he appreciated that joke. But I tried. But anyway, you have all of these Jewish priests with nothing to do. It's a sort of a strange reality, which of course we don't think about, because for us, priests are ordained by their own choosing. But in the Jewish world, you're part of these priestly families, and I was talking to a rabbi, actually. The crazy thing about being a chaplain in the military is you meet all these different religious leaders that you would probably have never met otherwise. And this rabbi was telling me that, I was asking him about that. So are you a priest or what? I don't really know. Just help me understand. And he said, well, the interesting thing is that the leaders of the church today are, generally speaking, rabbis, and we don't have to be priests. Some of them are, some of them aren't. It doesn't really matter. From time to time, though, the priests are called out to impart the priestly blessing on the people. But he says it's sort of lackluster, because it's almost like the good times are here, but not. I don't know. It was sort of funny listening to him talk about it. But anyway, the Jews, they have a priesthood and no altar. That's the thing. There's a priesthood and no altar. Of course, they're waiting for the Messiah to come back to restore all of that. They're waiting. But we, how did I get into this? Priesthood, yeah. Because priests are ordained before the altar of God, so that through their ministry, the sacrifice might be perpetuated on the altar, and that the altar can have meaning. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Yeah, I think it's a kind of an interesting thing that priests are asked to, I made a big deal in the beginning about altars and sacrifice, that altars are places where things are killed, serious places. The reason I think the priesthood, the way that we do it in the Roman church is interesting because the man that is going to go up to the altar and say the ancient words that invoke the ancient God upon the altar, that comes to love us and to forgive us and, to save us and all those kinds of things. We demand that man give up everything to do it. We don't just let anybody. We don't just let anybody go to the altar. It's a whole process. It's a whole crazy thing. We like to complain about how much the seminary was horrible and stuff like that, and it was. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it's such a serious bit of furniture. It's such an important thing that we make a man go through all kinds of study and all kinds of hardship. I don't want to inflate my own ego here. Hear my mom tell me that. But anyway, we make a guy go through all kinds of nonsense to be able to do it. And at the end, it's like, are you gonna forsake everything else for this one ministry? And the seminary process is so long because at the end of that, your yes better mean yes. You sure as heck better mean this for the rest of your life and for eternity, because the altar is a place where things go to die. So that other things might live. This interesting dynamic that we have in all of human experience, that things die so that others might live. I'm thinking of like Mufasa, or the antelope become the grass or whatever. But it's that whole kind of thing is what we're talking about here in the priesthood before the altar in its own way. And then eventually you're buried before the altar of God. Eventually you've breathed your last. And that priest who laid down before the altar of God years ago comes to your bedside and says the ancient words that forgives your sins and all those kinds of things. And your family is comforted, and it's time to send you off in the way that we do before the altar of God. Before the altar of God, where first the divine life was breathed into you, you've now breathed your last, and you're going on to a place where altars are no longer necessary in heaven. The Lamb is the altar. That's kind of the idea of the kingdom of heaven. The whole of our Catholic life is lived before the altar of God in the shadow of the altar. And I think that sometimes we need to pause and reappropriate that, just how important that is for ourselves. Because we come into these churches all the time, and you guys have a very pretty church, even though it's in this strange building. It was way better than the Chevy dealership that you used to have, Tim. But the thing is, we get used to seeing it. We get used to all the altar stuff, the incensing of the altar, the things that happen at the altar servers, all of it. But I just think we need to reawaken ourselves to the fact that this is something that we have that a whole lot of other Christians don't. Honestly. I had this chaplain buddy of mine who was some sort of, his denomination was Christian church, which I said, well, that's descriptive. Christian church / Churches of Christ, that's what his thing was. And he couldn't really just explain it real well. Good guy, though. But anyway, he said to me, we were sort of, talking about, sort of our differences or whatever when we were at the chaplain schoolhouse. We didn't have anything else to do. It was COVID, so we were just stuck on base the entire time. Well, anyway, so eventually we started talking about it, and I was explaining to him about altars, investments, or whatever. He thought he was fascinated by it because they got nothing like that in his church. And he said, it's funny because really all I need is a Bible and a box of snakes, and I'm good. It was funny. It was good. He was making fun of himself. I've since used that a bunch of times to other prots who did not think it was very funny. But regardless, we can't just get by with the Bible and a box of snakes. We can't. We can't do it. We can't live our religion without our stuff, because the stuff is very important. Because Jesus shed his blood onto the earth, real blood onto real ground. Okay. That's to save the souls of real people. And he gave us this ritual by which we would always remember, and not just remember, but experience kind of an active memory of what he did for us all those years ago that he's still doing today. You know, and we can't just do without stuff. And the altar, the thing that we can't live without. From time to time, other things can substitute for altars. You know, I mean, let's think of wartime. You know, the hoods of Jeeps, the ground itself. You know, floors of prison cells. I mean, there's all kinds of other things that can substitute for altars. You know, but the place that occupies in our lives, we can't not have it. You know, and I think that for you guys, you should venerate and respect and love the altar of this church. You know, because there are many oh, shoot, how does the thing go? I had to memorize this at one point. There are many altars, but this one is mine. there are many like it, but this one is mine. This is the serial number. But the thing is that it's really important, you know, because this altar, this thing right here that I'm standing in front of, this is where God comes to meet you, right here. In the primary way. He comes to meet you face to face on this particular bit of furniture, and it's sacred because of that, you know. God loves you so much that he would visit you in your human nature, in a human way. That's one thing that the Protestants miss a lot of the time. You know, in my experience of working with them and stuff like that, that's one of the things they miss. You know, that a lot of the time, they're big on your sort of internal relationship with God. You know, my prayers that I have with him, kind of a virtual relationship. And boy, that came out during COVID, didn't it? I mean, we had a terrible time doing church when we weren't allowed to do church. You know, you just cannot convince a Catholic that online mass meets the need. You know, I mean, there were kind of people that were on their way out the door anyway, and now they're fine with it. Whatever, okay, but forget that. But I mean, like, you know, Catholics are trying to do this right. There's nothing satisfying about watching it on TV. There just isn't. You know, I mean, it doesn't work for us because there's nothing human about it. About watching it on TV. There's nothing human. You come to church and it's human. It's human again. In the Protestant church, it's a lot of the time it's about this virtual relationship that you have with God. You know, I pray to him. I talk to him. You know how Jesus says, "Go to your room and close the door and pray to your Father in secret." Which I'm not saying that any of that's bad or wrong or anything else like that. But that's not the primary thing that we do. You know, our touchstone for our relationship with God is a literal stone. Okay, it's this actual piece of wood in your case, on which the ancient God becomes present for you. You know, that is the primary way, and it has to be the primary way that we as Catholics experience our God, is on the altar of our church. You know, just last week I was home visiting my mom and dad in Missouri, St. Joseph, Missouri, and I went on a little pilgrimage to my home parish where I received every sacrament, with the exception of holy orders. And I was in there, and it's funny. You come back, and you just the smells. It just comes right back to you. Everything is exactly the same. A little dustier. Not quite as many people are coming to church as they used to. You know, the Catholic schools are kind of, they're declining a little bit. You know, and so a little, I don't know, disappointing in many ways. But the altar is exactly the same. You know, I remember, boy, my entire life with God, which is the most important part of my life, happened right there. My father's life the same. You know, same parish he went to, you know, and his father, even to a certain extent, before the altar of that church. And you can trace these generations of Fitzpatricks that have been nourished by their God, that have done all the things that human beings do in the shadow of that altar there at that church. It's an amazing thing. You know, we have our faith has a lineage. You know, it's not just something that starts out of nowhere. Somebody gave it to you. You know who gave it to you? God. That gets us a little bit into a medieval controversy about grace, but we'll just forget that, okay? But it comes to you from God. A priest gave that to you through your baptism. You know, your parents made you come to it. You know, over the years, you received his body and blood at the altar because it was important, and you came back to the same place and saw the same people. And everywhere you go in the world, you're going to find one. You know. You go to Japan, you'll find one. You go to Alaska, you'll find one everywhere. There's no place that is untouched physically, okay, not just metaphorically, physically, by the salvation of Jesus. There's not one place that is not touched by it. And you will find an altar on which God wants to look you in the eye and say, I love you. Or he wants to look you in the eye and say, I forgive you. And he wants to look you in the eye and say, you need to be better. And you need to get your life together. And in the Catholic Church, the one thing that we do well, and it's not because of we, it's because of God, is experience him in a human way, a divine person in a human way, and it all is because of the altar. And it's an amazing thing. The prayers of the church are poured forth from the altar. You know, we talk about, you know, I'll pray for you. One of the kind of the most poignant things, and maybe I'll, how are we doing here? Yeah, maybe I'll leave you with this. Saint Augustine, we're all familiar with Saint Augustine. When his mother, Monica, this is a funny thing, Saint Monica. You know, every mother loves Saint Monica. You know, Saint Monica's so wonderful. You're praying for her, you know, son Augustine. Who doesn't have a son like Augustine? My mom doesn't, but who doesn't? Anyway, I'm sure she would disagree. If she were here, I can just feel her rearing back to slap me there on that one. But the point is, you know, Augustine he's the bishop now. He's this renowned Christian. He's left all of his nonsense behind him for the most part, and he's all into it. He's even more famous than he ever was. And Monica is dying. They were on a kind of a vacation together, Augustine and Monica, and finally she's oh no, sorry, I was going to say a funny thing. The funny thing is, every mom loves Monica until they have to be Monica. Yeah, isn't that the funny thing? Like, Saint Monica is so wonderful. Like you hear like young moms talking about, oh, I just love Saint Monica. I'm like, oh, you do now. Yeah, when you have to, you know, cry when you pray every day, you're not gonna love it so much. But still imitate Saint Monica. But it's kind of one of those funny. See, in the priest world, you can almost see all of somebody's life play out right now, even though I'm only 36 years old and I've seen it a million times. You're like, oh, the young people that get married and they're so excited. They're going to be the ones. They're going to be the ones that have a relationship without qualms and fighting, and in which everything's fine. You're like, good for you. You're the one. Awesome. Or like your parents, and they've got their first child, and the child's like 1 year old, and they're like, we made it. We made it. This child is not turning into a horrible thing. It's mostly obedient. We love it. We did it right. We did it right. And you're like, oh, no, you didn't. You didn't. You're not the one. They all think they're the one for a while, and then eventually, 2.5 years comes around, and you're definitely not the one. That's the thing. Whatever. But anyway, Augustine and Monica, they're there. They're on vacation, and Monica's about to die, and she knows it. It's a funny thing. Some of the greatest saints sort of knew when they were going to die. I guess it's a gift that God gave to them. For what reason we don't know, or maybe it's just how we tell the story later on. But Monica is about to die, and Augustine's sad because they've finally gotten back together. After all these years of Augustine being bad and probably trying to avoid his mom, and honestly, probably Monica nagging at him and whatever else. And then they've got this good thing going, and Augustine says, "Well, where do you want to be buried, Mom?" And she says, "Bury my body wherever you will. Only remember me at the altar of God." That's what she says. Remember me at the altar of God. Because she knows my body's, when it's dead, it's dust. It doesn't matter. She was super real about that, like an Italian mom. Yeah, it's dust. Who cares? Forget about it. Remember me before the altar of God. She doesn't say, hey, say a bunch of rosaries for me when I die. She doesn't say, hey, remember, just really emotionally ask God to save me from my sins. She doesn't say any of that. All that would be fine. What mom doesn't want emotional prayers to be said for her after she's dead? She says, though, remember me before the altar of God. And she's not just talking, by the way, to Augustine. She's got another son. There's two of them. And Augustine's a priest, and her other son is what no one cares because he was Augustine's brother. Okay, anyway, whatever he did, it's like being my sister's. But anyway, but the thing is, it's like being Lucy Fitzpatrick. It's a hard life. But anyway, But she says it to both of them. That's the thing. Remember me before the altar of God. You, Augustine the priest, when you're offering the sacrifice, and every Mass we get to offer it for an intention. It's perhaps the privilege of the priesthood is we get to do that. But she says also, but you, Layman, my son, whatever his name was, you pray for me before the altar of God too, okay? You have the same responsibility to go before the altar to pray for me, because praying for me at the altar is better than praying for me anywhere else. Okay, do it. Go there to pray for me. Did you know that in the what we call the Eucharistic prayer of the Mass, the canon, there is a commemoration of the living before the consecration and after the consecration. There's a commemoration of the living, in which the priest is praying for those who are alive, and then after the am I right about that, Father Rivak? Yeah. Okay. I didn't ask Father Tim. But anyway, but after the. And then after the Mass, you notice this, the priest goes, he's talking to God like this in the orans position. Then the hands go like this, and he's quiet for a second, and it's like awkward pause. Every now and then, like a new deacon tries to get him to keep going because he doesn't know what the deal is. Or every now and then, servers will ring the bells at that point because they're so thrown off by the awkward pause. Like, oh, it must be me, ring. That's a funny thing. But what the priest is doing there, though, is he's remembering privately to God the souls of those who have died. So everybody, there's a way for us to do this. There's a way written into the very Mass itself for us before the altar of God to remember those who have died and those who are alive that need our prayers. It's a really important thing. It's not just the priest doing it. Everybody has to do it. When you walk into the church, you should have people that you need to pray for, that you're praying for at Mass. Sometimes I hear Catholics say this, I pray I pray and I go to Mass. There's prayer and then there's Mass, as if they're different. You ever hear that? Praying is what I do when I go to my room and I close my door and I say my rosary or read the scripture or whatever else, and then Mass is just Mass. It's not really prayer. It's Mass. And honestly, that's the way that the Protestants that I know in the Navy Chaplain Corps, that's how they view our religion. What we share together is the fact that we talk to God. We call God Father and we pray to Him with our own words, and express our hearts to Him, which is great. Don't get me wrong, it's good stuff. And then you have that cultish ritual that you do that's strange and against the gospel, i.e. the Mass. That's kind of sort of the way. One guy even told me that, the cultish ritual you do. He was an ex-Catholic, so whatever. But anyway, the Mass is our prayer. The Mass is our prayer, okay? It is. And the altar is that place where we make our prayer. The prayer of the church, capital P, capital O, oratio, the prayer of the church is made at the altar. That is the place that it's made. And everything else is gravy, as my father would say. Everything else is gravy. The main place it's made is before the altar. And the priest prays and you pray. We're all praying, okay, before that altar for the people that need our prayers, for the people that we know, for people we don't know that might need us, for those who have died. There's a place before the altar of God where we make all of our petitions known to Him. And perhaps most importantly of all, before the altar of God, we get on our knees and we allow God to do for us what only He can, to transform us in the unspoken way that He moves the human heart, just by grace alone. Yeah, it's an amazing thing. So anyway, everybody, altars are important. And the way that altars are adorned, the respect that we pay to them, the fact that the Most Blessed Sacrament usually is housed on them in the tabernacle, is just who we are. The altar is who we are as Christians, okay? It is our identity. If you want to look for your identity as a Christian somewhere that isn't the altar of God in the church, you're wrong. That's all there is to it. That's where it is, because it's where all of the dramatic moments of our Catholic lives play out. Everything that is important to you and everything that matters in our lives, for the most part, happens right here in the shadow of the altar of God, because it's where His divine love is given to us in a human way, in which we can receive all that we possibly can. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is be grateful to God for loving you in a human way, and not just making it a virtual relationship, not just saying do your best to imagine what my love would be like, but rather just go to the church where you receive it for free. And all I ask is that you open up my heart and be grateful for what I've given to you. And do your best, it's easy to do, but do your best to not take the altar for granted. You know, it's funny, I was walking in here earlier, and I was telling Father Tim this earlier, or Father Mike, I don't know, anyway, some priest that was here. I was walking into the church, and I noticed that, I think it was Father Tim, actually, genuflected. And let me tell you, I have not been in a church yet at genuflect in for like 2 years, because in Japan, in these military chapels, the Blessed Sacrament is usually in a different room, because the big chapel is multi-use, you know, so we put it away so that it, anyway, because all kinds of ridiculous things happen there. The military chapels are used for all kinds of weird things, like, for example, like command events, you know, lance corporals, seminar graduation happens in there. And I always make the joke, no one ever laughs, but I make the joke every time that you get all these lance corporals. It's like an E4 in the Marine Corps. It's an E3. You get them in the chapel, and then the holy water boils. You lose a couple inches every time you get that many in there. Thanks. I appreciate the laughter. It almost goes over as poorly as my camouflage joke. But anyway, being able to have a church with an altar that's made out of real stuff, before which we worship God with our own bodies and our minds together, is an incredible privilege that Jesus Christ has given to his church, okay? You find true worship and truly the love of God where you find a church with an actual altar in it, okay? And this is our patrimony going all the way back to the tombs of the martyrs. And we reverence the altar, we love the altar, and we allow it to define us. We allow it to define us in our relationship with God, and perhaps even also his relationship with us. So we're in a long line of people for thousands and thousands, many thousands of years who have worshiped before altars. You know, this is not peculiar to Christianity, but in Christianity, worship of sacrifice is perfected, and it's made into its truest form. Just because we're Christians doesn't mean we've left sacrifice behind. We have not left altars behind. We have not left the world of incense and cultic action behind. It's just that the sacrifice is the sacrifice of Jesus, made once for all. And we experience every time we come, not just for Mass, but every time you come into this church. You know, here it is, the very presence of God alive on the altar because he loves you. Okay, that's all I got to say. Any questions or rebuttal about anything?
This might not be the time, but you have a chaplain friend that actually saw bin Laden go into the ocean?
Yeah, yes. This guy was several years, senior to me by a lot. But yeah, matter of fact, he was on the Carl Vinson when that happened. Yep.
I just heard conflicting stories, but if you had a visual or your friend had a visual.
This guy had a visual. Yeah, Chaplain Williams was on the ship when it happened. Yep. It was all hush hush. It was in the middle of the night. This story gets embellished a lot by people. I heard this one version of it where some special operations, super secret helicopter that no one could hear came in the middle of the night and dropped him off in his bloody body bag and all that kind of stuff. Well, the only thing that could make it from ship to shore would probably be like an Osprey MV-22. Odds are, and those things are not anyway. But yeah, he did see it, and actually, there wasn't even a Muslim chaplain on board. There was we have these like lay leaders. So there was a Muslim, like a layman that read the Muslim prayers or whatever when they put it over. But anyway, Chaplain Williams told me he saw it. So he could have been, he could have been lying. I'll just say that. He could have been lying to me, but he made it sound like for sure he really did, yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Questions about anything? Rando? Sir?
Is it possible to have sacraments somewhere besides at the altar? Like a baptism?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Sure. I mean, in a pinch, you know what I mean? In odd circumstances, sure we can. Yeah, you baptize anywhere. You can baptize babies in the hospital. In the Navy, there's this interesting tradition of, every ship has got any Navy people in here? Yeah. So, the ship's bell, you bring the important people on and off the ship. There's this tradition of baptizing children in the church's bell. You turn the bell upside down, fill it with water, and baptize babies in there. No idea where that came from, that tradition, but it's a thing. And the name of the babies that are baptized are inscribed in the inside of the bell, of the ship's bell. So I say about the thing about the altar, I suppose, ships, I guess that's a little different. There's an altar inside a ship, though, so that counts. But the Mass certainly is celebrated in strange places. I've done that a bunch of times. Celebrated in the field, celebrated in the dirt, and yes, the answer is yes. Please. Let me tell you what, it's awfully strange because most of what I do is not Catholic-y kind of stuff. So, for example, I walk into the office and I've got these administrative jobs that I do that have nothing to do with religion. For example, I manage our fleet of. I did. It's all gone now. Thank God. All this Okinawa stuff is over. But I managed our fleet of government vehicles, so I would have to go inventory those and stuff. I was the contract officer that paid our contractors, the organists and things like that. And I was also the new guy. There's things that we called that I can't tell you in church, but I was the new guy. And that meant that I was the voting officer. I'd make sure we all had our absentee ballots and stuff like that. But generally speaking, with all that nonsense, we had a Mass at least once a day that I would celebrate. And then a lot of the time, we just sort of like waited for Marines to show up. Because this particular assignment that I was stationed at a chapel. And in the Navy, Marine Corps, there's two different assignments we can have. We can either be assigned to chapels or with units. So, for example, my next assignment is going to be with 1st Battalion, 11th Marine Regiment. So I'll be a unit chaplain at that point, which means wherever this battalion of Marines go, whatever they do, I go with them. And being part of it. In Okinawa, I was the chapel guy, so I was more of a parish priest. So our job was to be at the chapel all the time and wait for Marines to come in and talk to us about their woes, which they did regularly. Lance corporals have a lot of woes, that's the thing. So whatever else I had to do during the day might get derailed by Lance Corporal Schmuckatelli coming in to talk to me about whatever. So a lot of time it was that, just kind of waiting around for people to come in. And usually there was no shortage of people to come in. We get an hour to PT, to exercise during the day. The Marines are big about that. They give you an hour to PT. And some people take that hour to sleep or do other stuff. So we had that. And then in the evenings, we had stuff like this, the kind of the evening stuff that you have at the parish. Or whatever. It was totally unpredictable. Kind of like priest life is in general, totally unpredictable. The X in the equation of military priest life is what horrible administrative task am I going to have to do that has nothing to do with God. Did one of the government vehicles have a flat tire, and now I have to figure out how to do that? It is we have these enlisted chaplain assistants that work with us. Did one of those guys get into trouble over the weekend, and now I have to fix that, or did nonsense like that. One of the worst things you had to do, this is my experience anyway, is we have to write these fitness reports, so at the, and you got to do them all the time for all these dumb reasons, Your commanding officer leaves, you got to do a fitness report. It's just an exercise in lying and deception about how good you were at your job. That's all it is, 100% lying, and I hate doing it. And you had to do like 3 of them a year. And I stress out about it. I think about it. That's the thing that I have to do as in a military priest that other priests don't have to. But let me tell you what I don't have is I don't have to worry financially about the parish. Let me tell you what, that is a winner if ever there was. My father Timmy can back me up on that. The government pays for Catholicism. crazy, because the government doesn't seem to be super excited about Catholicism right now. But I don't have to worry about people voting with their feet, kind of, you know what I mean, and voting with their wallets at the parish. So it's kind of nice. Also, in the military world, because of rank structure and how it is, generally speaking, people accept, my word is final on Catholicism because they have to. In the parish, I don't know if Father Tim can back me up on this. That's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes people have differences of opinion. But I have noticed at least, or maybe I'm just that congenial of a person, but I've noticed at least in that I don't have people saying, "Oh, Father, you did this, and we hate that, and this is why you're wrong." For the most part, people seem to accept that. Oh, well, you're the subject matter expert, so that's it. That's kind of neat. I've enjoyed that. It's probably why Jesus and the centurion, the centurion comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, I want you to come and heal my son." And Jesus says, "Whatever. My son's died." And Jesus says, No, your son's going to live. And he does. And the centurion says to Jesus, "Listen, I'm a man under orders, and I know that if you come and do this, I know that my son's going to be he's going to live." He had that because he had military discipline, and he had sort of the military bearing, and he knew chain of command. He knows how that works, and he knows that Jesus is the one in the divine chain of command that's going to fix his son's problem, and he had absolute faith because he was a military officer. It's amazing. So it kind of works out for us in the military world, at least has so far. Anyway, sir. That's a great question. In June, I went on a little trip to Tokyo, and Okinawa is about, I don't know how many miles. It's a 2.5-hour plane ride to mainland Japan. And COVID really killed a lot of things in Japan for us. It was hard to travel because the Japanese were just so very, very super freaked out about COVID, I guess. But anyway, so we were finally allowed to travel again. So I went to Tokyo and I visited a bunch of pagan shrines, some Buddhist shrines. I visited some Shinto shrines and even a Confucian one. They're amazing to me and strange. And actually, when I was in Tokyo for a First Friday, and this other priest that I went with, and my Protestant buddy with the box of snakes. All three of us were there, and we were in this pagan temple, and they were having a big ritual because guess what? They celebrate First Friday too, like we do. I had no idea, but these Buddhists in the middle of Tokyo are having. I mean, it's not the Sacred Heart, and they were beating these drums, and it sounded like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but. They were having this First Friday celebration. It was just one of the coolest things I've ever seen. All these monks in this temple, and they all had different kind of vestments on, and they were burning incense. And then the head guy up in the front was saying some special prayers. I'm like, maybe it's just a priest-to-priest thing. I just thought it was cool, But either way, it was neat. And when we got done with this whole experience, to my Protestant buddy, I say, "So listen. Looks like you're the odd man out here because these like ancient pagans and we two priests here have got all this stuff in common. The use of incense, the use of prayers, the use of a sacred language, celebrating days. Like First Friday, commemorating a kind of a liturgical calendar almost. There's a celibate priesthood, and all of these other temples we went, same things. Elaborately decorated buildings, cool stuff, rituals like this. And I remember saying to him, so then was just everyone wrong until like 1580? Or, what was the deal? I was being a little funny with him, but at the same time, he was like, yeah, I have no idea what to say about that. Honestly, is what Adam Bogus said. He was a particularly amenable to discussion Protestant, I will say. But in my response to your question about, Jesus talking about, oh, all we need is just a couple of people to pray and then I'm there. Okay, yeah, he says that. But what is Jesus not saying that he feels like he doesn't have to say? Because there really isn't an ancient religion in which people just gather together in a meadow under the stars and pray together. It really just doesn't happen like that. The Jews started doing something similar when they were exiled into Babylon, and they had to kind of figure out a way to keep their identity without the temple. But for the most part, people in a religion worship in a specific place, and I don't think that Jesus saying, when 2 or 3 people are gathered in my name, I'm there, he means 2 or 3 people and that's it. All I need is people. I think what he means is when you gather at the place where you gather, I'm going to be there with you. I think that's what he means. But the Protestants will say in response to that, yeah, but all the stuff you have gets in the way. Because if God is so good and powerful and everything else, why would you need anything to get in the way of your relationship with him? Stuff just gets in the way. Whatever. And then my response to that is, well, then why did Jesus use bread and wine? I mean, why did he make use of things then? If things are going to get in the way, why did he say, and then that's where the dialogue kind of breaks up, because we've just got these 2 totally established traditions that are just kind of probably not going to see eye to eye, on the institutional levels at that point. Because like there's things that, and it's not just their fault, because like there are certain things that I would never do just because the Protestants do it. Like for example, like Amazing Grace. I'm not singing that. I don't care if it's right or wrong. I'm not doing it. It's a Protestant song, Or like How Great Thou Art. Sorry, I'm not going to do that. I refuse. Is there like wrong theology in there? Not necessarily. Amazing Grace, maybe. Total Depravity, there could be that in there. But it's just like, not really in our wheelhouse, so I'm not going to be part of that. Kind of a, so we both sides we do that, okay? It's not just like, oh, the Prots are wrong and, therefore blah, blah, blah. But that's, I guess, kind of a long, rambly way to answer your question. That's what I like to say a lot of time. There are so many things that all of us religionists have in common, but we don't have in common with a lot of different kinds of evangelical Christians, and there's a little bit of a breakdown there, I think. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for the time to be with you. It's a privilege to be here. Thanks for letting me talk at you. And Father Tim, thank you for having me here at the parish. It's been a wonderful thing to come and be with you. Father Tim and I were, of course, classmates in the seminary. We've known each other for a long time. I'm wearing his quilted jacket right now because I'm freezing in Georgia. Anyway, thank you very much. May I bless you before we leave? May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit descend upon you and remain with you forever. Amen. Amen.